Okay, yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth edition of our program this evening. Sorry for the inconvenience last week that may have been caused for many of you who may have tuned in and was, just under the surprise that we could not be on because of some technical difficulties, and we do apologize to you all. Nonetheless, we are here this week and we are here to discuss important matters relating to Dominica's economy. And we'll look at tonight, we have the Honorable Political Leader, Dr. Thomson Fontaine with us, and he will be looking at some of the, economic indicators, that will at least bring some light as to what is happening in the economy. But Doc, before we go right into it, I would like to just say, I'd just like to ask you what is happening in the Atlantic. I know you have been looking at many things happening, and we can talk economics, we can talk agriculture, we can talk growth sectors. But if we have something in the Atlantic, we have to go and look to put our house in order. So tell us what is happening, and then we'll go right.
Well, yes, so very, very, very good night to you, and of course to our many, many listeners spread out from across the globe. It is indeed an honor to be back on Real Talk tonight, and we have a very, very interesting program, I can tell you, because we are taking a look at Dominica in the numbers, a deep dive into some of those numbers, and we are comparing Dominica with our neighboring countries, not with the United States, but with St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua and St. Kitts and Nevis. Right. And I can tell you, you will be surprised at what we reveal tonight in terms of the numbers. But with respect to the question that you posed, talking about the weather, we do have the possibility of a hurricane or a tropical storm being formed towards the end of this week, and the odds on that are increasing every day because the conditions in the Atlantic are very, very favorable for the development of that storm that just rolled off the coast of Africa today. So it rolled off the coast of Africa. It will take approximately 6 to 7 days to get to the islands. The worry is that before it gets to us, it will develop into a hurricane or a tropical storm. Now, the forecasters, there are many, as you know, there are different models that try to forecast the weather. And some models are saying, yes, there will be a hurricane. Other models are saying that it will only be a tropical storm by the time it gets to us. Now, so there is some certainty as to it becoming something, either a tropical depression, a tropical storm, or at worst, a hurricane. The next question is whether or not it will pass over the islands. And it is very, very early days yet, but what they're looking at, they're trying to see how quickly it will develop. If it develops very, very quickly into a tropical depression, a tropical storm, say within the next 24 to 48 hours, there is a good chance it will go past us. If, however, development takes longer, if it develops, say, on Friday or Saturday, that's when it develops, then there's a likelihood that it will pass over the island. So the timing of the storm setting up is critical, and that will determine whether or not we get adverse weather on the weekend into Monday next week. But my hope is that it will do as Erin did, although Erin formed before it met us, but Erin took quite a novelty track and said well clear of the island. So I'm hoping the same thing happens this time.
Yes, I hope so myself, and the good Lord will intervene on our behalf because He loves us, He loves His people, and we cannot take more because we already have a government that is already a hurricane. To get we have a man-made hurricane, and to get a real hurricane on our account now, compounded with what is happening right now, I think we'll be in trouble. But I pray that nothing happens. But before we get into it, I know you have to get to the raw numbers, the real numbers, and people going. It's going to be an exciting program tonight. I just want to just give a background as to where we go in, and I just going to read a preamble as to set the stage and direction for our discussion. So according to the Caribbean Development Bank and its publication, the Caribbean Economic Review and Outlook 2024, 2023, 2024, 2025. So according to the Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean region has largely emerged from the shocks of the past few years, with economic growth persisting inflation moderating from its peak, and public debt on a downturn path or downward path. The recovery boosted by a strong tourism resurgence builds on the Caribbean's enduring story of resilience. Notwithstanding, the Caribbean remains one of the disaster-prone regions globally. There is an increased frequency of extreme weather events and climate-related impacts, posing significant risk to stable and sustainable development. Well, the Caribbean Economic Review and Outlook will undoubtedly serve as both a reflection of our shared experiences as a region and a pathway for the future. And I mean, this report provides a comprehensive review of the region's economic performance in 2024 and its near-term prospects. Having said so, though, Doc, it's not surprising that and every year that you have this report comes up by the CDB, and to look at various islands and their performance and economic indicators. Example, probably stay arrivals, tourism, and talking about visitors, cruise visitors or arrivals. And Doc, I know that you have been a person close to the figures. You've worked in the statistics department in Dominica before you pursue studies. Now you are a world-renowned economist and you have been involved in the numbers all the time, because when you go out to in aid of assisting countries recover and put in economic programs for recovery of their respective economies, you must be looking at numbers, and the numbers tell what exactly and which direction you're going, because numbers they can say a lot, although there are a number of inferences that can be drawn from data, but at least they are important and crucial with respect to directing a path of economic recovery. Doc, as it relates to real growth for Dominica, and probably you can intertwine that with the region and make a comparison as you go along. What is it like for us, and where are we going? What is Dominica's situation compared to the other Caribbean islands, particularly those in the same sub-region like us, like the Windward Islands, like the Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent? Tell us where we are. Paint a picture of where we are and where are we going.
All right. Thanks a lot, Soso, and it's a good place to start. And what I've done is I have put on the screen. I have put okay. See, I'm going ahead of myself there.
Yes, I saw
a very colorful, if you like, picture of the story for us there. And I hope it is possible for our viewers to see what is on the screen. This is the rate of economic growth. Now, what that is really is a measure of how the country is doing over time. And what I did, I went back to the year 2000. So we're looking at economic growth from 2000 to 2024. That period was deliberately chosen because it covers the period of Labour Party rule in Dominica. And so we have these different countries that we are comparing Dominica to. So we are comparing what has happened in Antigua and Barbuda and the rest, and St. Kitts and Nevis and the rest of the Windward Islands compared to Dominica. Now, what I've done is and I hope I'm not confusing anyone with this chart, but the charts have different, if you like, they have different color schemes. And if you look at below, the information below, right at the bottom there, you will see that the blue shows average growth from 2010 to 2014. That's the blue. I hope that's orange. Orange shows average growth from 2015 to 2019, and then average growth from 2020 to 2024. So I have and then that is the gray. And then the last one is what color is that? Yellow. Let's call it yellow for argument's sake, because I'm not too good on colors. But the yellow shows the overall from 2000 to 2024. Now let's look at that one. Let's look at the overall. So you're going across the countries. You're comparing it country by country effectively. So let's look, for example, at if we start with Antigua and Barbuda, and we're looking at the orange, we'll see that Antigua and Barbuda over the past 25 years grew on average of 2%. Okay, so that's Antigua and Barbuda, an average of 2%. Then we come to Dominica. Dominica over that same period would have grown by 1.2%. Okay, so 1.2%. St. Kitts and Nevis for that same 25-year period grew by 2.5%. That's 2.5. St. Lucia grew by 1.8. St. Vincent and the Grenadines grew by 3.1, and Grenada by 2.5. Now, you know why I find that these numbers to be very interesting. The country that is leading the economic growth in this is the country that does not have CBI.
Very interesting.
Very
Very
right?
interesting.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines has never gone into CBI, yet they have the highest rate of real growth over 25 years, outpacing even St. Lucia and Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis. So St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda, they're all involved in either the CIP, Citizenship by Investment Program, or something, CBI, something like it. And yet they have not been able to match the performance of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So that to me is extremely important as we set the stage tonight, because we have really low economic growth. I mean, throughout, the best we have is 3.1% in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That tells me that within the region, we still have a lot to go, because for our countries to really move forward, we need to have at least a rate of growth of between 5 to 8%. So we have a lot of work to do, basically, to catch up. Okay, so you would have seen that. So that's your yellow there. That is showing the overall growth from 2024 to 2025, and then we have average growth between 2010 and 2014, and that is the blue. And again, the Antigua and Barbuda is the one that did worse during that period, falling by minus 0.6, less than 1%. And Grenada was St. Kitts and Nevis, was the best performer during that period. Then if you look at the average growth between 2020 and 2024, so you're looking at the gray, you're just comparing the grays for each of them, you will notice again that Antigua and Barbuda has a negative growth there. St. Lucia is the star performer, leading with 4.6%, followed by St. Vincent and the Grenadines with 2%. But the overall picture we have there, is a picture that shows that Dominica is the worst performer in the OECS countries as far as economic growth is concerned, as far as being able to generate that level of economic activity. Dominica is by far the worst performer. So we are not doing well at all as far as real GDP growth is concerned. And that has implications, of course, for all sorts of things. For employment, and later on, as we look more at the numbers, we look at the private sector, we'll see our private sector is extremely small compared to the private sectors in the other islands. So it has a lot of implications, for just the level of employment in the country, opportunities that you could have for our young people. That is also a problem, So it becomes very difficult when you consider that we're having those particular issues there.
Well, yes, and I'm happy that you were able to at least shed some light with respect to the real GDP growth, and I felt that it was well explained, and I believe those who are viewing and listening would have shared the same sentiment. But you made a very significant point. In fact, not just you, but the figures revealed, particularly St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where they are not part, this country has not sold us not one citizenship. In fact, the Honorable Ralph Right, Honorable Gonzalez said that, look, he's not going to sell in his birthright. So it's William St. Vincent's birthright. And it's important that, you could see in some respects that St. Vincent has led in some areas. The point is, what different? Because Saint Vincent is not in the CBI, and we are the countries like Antigua, Saint Lucia, Dominica, and Saint Kitts. Grenada, for instance, they are in CBI. What is it that Saint Vincent does differently? Because I know they are not in CBI, but what could cause them to at least have that kind of lead?
Okay, as we'll see as we go on with the data, as we move forward with the data, we'll be able to explain some of that, because you will see a situation where St. Vincent has a fairly well diversified economy. So
Right.
they're doing extremely well with agriculture. They're also doing extremely well with tourism. And because of that, the economy is a lot more diversified than a lot of other countries, even those that rely very heavily on one major industry, as is the case for Antigua, that relies almost exclusively on tourism. St. Vincent has found a way to develop its agriculture, export its produce to the various countries in the region, and then also to be able to really function as one of the top economies over the last 25 years in the Caribbean. Right. So that you will see as we go further with the data, um, because we have a lot more numbers that we want
Right.
to look at that to mix. But I wanted to be sure that everyone understood this particular graph. You see, Dominica is the shortest in every period we have been beaten. We are the only time we was in the period of 2010 to 2014, where Antigua, we did better than Antigua in that period. And you know why Antigua did not do well in 2010 and
Mhm.
2014. Antigua had that problem because we were just coming out of the major, that was the housing crisis in the United States, that took place in between 2008 and 2010. You had the major housing crisis in the United States where American households refrained from traveling. So you had a tremendous impact on the tourism sector in particular,
Right.
because Americans who were suffering from this downturn in the economy, the stock market fell. A lot of loans were called in. You had a lot of turmoil within those 2 years, and a number of American tourists did not travel, and that is the impact that you're seeing in Antigua during that period. And that's the reason why, when you are thinking about development, it's important to not have to rely too heavily on something that you have no control over. Okay, and again, it happened to Antigua again. If you see that period right after COVID, during the COVID period, the gain fell. That is
Yes.
because people were not traveling. So when you have a heavy tourism thing, now if you compare the gray of Antigua and Barbuda, which is negative, and you compare the grade of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you see St. Vincent was able to weather that. Even
Yes.
St. Lucia that has a tourism sector, they also have a well diversified economy. And so they did not suffer as greatly as Antigua did. Okay, and that's a very important message, for Caribbean leaders. As you think through your economic development processes, you have to look as far as possible to diversify. Never put your eggs in one basket. That has always been, that works in every area of life. You don't put your eggs in one basket. You hedge your bets. You strategize outside of one sector, and
Yes.
so that is the important message there.
Yes, and so Doc, we often hear about nominal growth, which really is a measure, or it measures the increase in the total dollar value of goods and services. Well, normally we would say it is really a measure of the overall economic value, but can be influenced by inflation. Where do we go from there? Talk to me about that.
All right, so we are right. So we're going to talk about nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is a very good measure of just the total output of the country, because what it measures is your total output of goods and services. And we can directly compare the different economies. So we can directly compare Dominica, say, with St. Lucia, or Dominica with Antigua. So that chart that we have there, that second chart gives, again, for the same countries, it shows the level of nominal growth or the total output of goods and services. And here's where it gets very interesting. So, for example, Dominica's total GDP is $1.8 billion EC dollars, okay? 1.8 billion EC dollars. St. Lucia's is almost 7 billion, okay?
Wow.
So that means St. Lucia is almost 4 times the size of the St. Lucian economy is almost 4 times the size of the Dominican economy. You understand what I'm saying? Almost 4 times.
Almost 4 times. That's shocking.
Almost 4 times, yeah?
Wow.
1.8 billion to St. Lucia's 6.9 billion. Okay.
Wow.
And then when we compare, and then those numbers are good as of December, as of 2024. So the numbers I'm using there are the GDP numbers for the year 2024, where those numbers have been confirmed. I did not use 25, I did not use the estimates, but I used the 2024 numbers. And that information has been taken practically from the IMF Article 4 reports. So there is a certain consistency with the methods that are used to measure, so we can directly compare those countries. Okay. So Antigua, on the other hand, is $6 billion. Okay. Antigua is 1 billion less than St. Lucia. It's $6 billion. But even at $6 billion, it is almost 4 times the size of it's 3 times actually. It's
size
3
of
times
Dominica.
the size of the Dominican economy. Yes. And then the closest to us is St. Vincent and the Grenadines in terms of the size of the economy, but St. Vincent is $3.1 billion. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, with no CBI, has a $3.1 billion economy. Dominica has a $1.8 billion economy. So that tells you. And then Grenada has been doing really well as well, $3.7 billion economy. St. Kitts and Nevis, $3 billion. So the only one we are way behind. Our closest actually is St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of the size, and St. Vincent, of course, St. Kitts and Nevis is a lot smaller than us. All right, it's a lot smaller in terms of population, in terms of resources, but they're still $1.2 billion more than the Dominican economy. So that is very significant. So that gives you that particular metric gives you a sense as to the size of Dominica and the size of the Dominican economy vis-a-vis the rest of the CARICOM, of the OECS countries. And again, I hate to say it, but we are dead last in the OECS.
Yes, and it's interesting.
And very small economy as well. 1.8 billion.
Yes, and the figures are interesting. So if we go, let's do a little further in-depth analysis of these figures, which means that I take it to understand, and many persons who are viewing would say, well, look, since, let's say, for instance, St. Vincent's economy, $3.1 billion, it means that there's an increase in consumption, there's an increase of jobs, there's an increase in investment. There are practically more things happening in this economy as compared to Dominica's economy. And probably, I don't know if you have the figures, but it would be important to know that when we say that the size of, when you mention the size of the economy over a period, do these countries or small island states, do they maintain that kind of economy? Because I know you could have sometime, let's say, I know last year, for instance, we had a 1.2 billion, and this year maybe 1.3. It looks like we're increasing. But what people are interested in is that to know whether or not this amount of money itself, when you give your budget, is that being spent? Is that money collected and actually spent? Because we have seen in recent times where our government, for instance, may say that, look, I have so much to spend in an economy. That is the economy I'm putting forward with respect to the budget, with respect to recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. However, when we are reporting, we never get to know whether we've had what they call a budget deficit, a budget surplus, or just a balanced budget. So can you just shed light on that with respect to, because the size of the economy shows that more activities are happening, and I suspect that's what people want to understand the whole idea of this economic indicator.
Right. So the question has to do with the budget and what you will find. And as we go through the numbers, I have some indicators there that reflects it later on
Right.
in the presentation. But what matters there is that in a number of these countries, the governments have successfully been able to use the budget to stimulate that kind of growth. Okay,
Right.
so they have been able to put in place policies and measures that expands, for example, the private sector. One of the major weaknesses in the Dominican economy is the fact that it is dominated by the government. And you will notice that if when we come to the numbers, you will see how different it is for St. Kitts and Nevis, for Antigua, for St. Lucia, how different it is with regards to the role that the private
Private
sector
sector.
plays.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is the reason why within our 10 pillars, our major focus is on the private sector. How do you provide incentives to the private sector? How do you get the private sector to be more involved in the economy and really share the burden? Take away some of the burden from government, because government is not the best player in terms of being able to stimulate the kind of growth. Because within government, usually there's a lot of waste. There is a lot of as we said, of underperformance of the budget, in the sense that monies are allocated yet they are not spent. Government wants to talk about a 1.6 billion budget, so they put that in the budget. But at the end of the day, the money is not made available to the departments. It is not spent. So you want to take away the burden from the government. And that is the reason, again, I want to stress, and that's the reason why Dominicans need to be listening to what we're saying as United Workers' Party, Team Dominica, as we get ready to take the reins of government in this country. The private sector will be a major focus to us. And I will come back to that, because there is a specific indicator that I have in my presentation tonight that I'm going to come back to the issue of the private sector. But
That's
for
right.
now, just to say that we have not succeeded, by the government, I mean by us, the government has not succeeded in being able to effectively use the resources to generate the kind of economic activity that we see the other countries, our neighbors, have been able to generate. So once again, Dominica, when the whistle blown, Dominica dead last. We last Kakarot as far as the size of the economies are concerned. As far as real GDP growth, we are dead last amongst our peers. That has to change. That absolutely has to change. There was a time, and the next time I do this, I want to go to before the 2000 period. So I'm going to do
Yes.
the same thing, but before the 2000 period, and compare our performance against the rest of the countries, and you will see a marked difference. That is the
Yes.
next thing that we'll do on a future program. I'm going to
Right.
get the numbers. When I went through the database, I realized I only had data up to 2000, which coincided nicely with the time the Labour Party started. But in terms of doing a comparison between the periods and see how I'm going to put that table that you see there between 2000 and 2024. I'm going to put that the ranking that shows Dominica dead last. I can guarantee you, when I do between say 19, another 20 years, say 1980, and between 1980 and 2000, you're going to find Dominica is flipped. Dominica is either one or two in that ranking. I can
That's
guarantee you
correct.
that, because that is the time we were beating this country's hands down under the Freedom Party and the United Workers' Party governments, uh,
Right.
doing exceptionally better than those countries. And that will be reflected. But that's for another day. For now, we're just showing as it is the current reality under the Dominican Labour Party, and it is not a good picture. It's a picture of Dominica suffering all the issues that we have. So with regards to unemployment, with regards to our social services, not being able to pick up the garbage, um, all of those problems that this country has, that our country has in abundance, can be pointed back to that. You see, the countries like Antigua, because they have much bigger economies, they can absorb Dominicans into their countries, they can provide jobs. The unemployment rate in St. Kitts and Nevis is as low as 11%. Our unemployment rate is most likely above 60% in Dominica, or youth employment rate. So you have those. I don't have the unemployment rates for all the countries, but I could not get the information. A number of countries don't conduct the unemployment surveys. When I worked in statistics in the 90s, we used to do it. We used to do the labor force surveys. So we knew exactly what the unemployment rate was. This particular government has stopped doing that. They no longer do labor force surveys, so we don't know what the population, what the unemployment rate is. We can only guess. But I can guarantee you, based on the size of those economies compared to ours, we again would be dead last with regards to unemployment, in the sense that we'd have the highest rate of unemployment among the countries of the OECS. There is absolutely no question about it. Just looking at this particular statistic there on nominal GDP, you can rest assured that that translates to very little jobs, very little opportunities. And again, Dominica would be dead last compared to the rest of the islands around us.
Yes, well,
All right.
well said, well said. And someone is saying, but what do you expect when a teacher thinks he is a financial expert? When a teacher thinks that he's a financial expert. I know you have another chat and you're going to talk about inflation and we get in there, but also too, sometime along the line, I would like you to actually give us some, detail with respect to the debt to GDP ratio, which is a total country government debt
That's
expressed as a
coming up.
percentage.
That's coming
Okay.
up. That's coming up.
Right. So we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yes.
But yes, let us deal with inflation and the impact it has with respect to or hindrance with respect to growth, because for sure salaries remain the same, and the cost of goods go up, particularly the petrochemical products. Any product that is manufactured using fuel, using petroleum, using fuel, you know that product will be scarce, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, and with a lot of people take medicines and so. So yes, we would like to hear about inflation, and so give us that kind of understanding as to how does inflation impact generally on a country's economy. Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about inflation because it has, as you said, a very important impact on people's, in particular, their spending power. Inflation is just the rise in the price level. So if your income remains unchanged, if your government is not giving you a salary increase, if you're not getting salary increase in the private sector, if your minimum wage is way low, then inflation is going to have a bite at it. Now, Dominica did relatively well in the past with regards to the rest of the countries as far as inflation was concerned. So if you look at the period, and I go back to 2010, if you look at the 5-year period between 2010 and 2014, the average rate of inflation in Dominica was 1.1%. It was actually the lowest in the countries, all right, 1.1. So we were right about there. Then in 1.1 over a 5-year period that you're talking about, inflation increasing by 5% during that 5-year period, right? 5.5%.
Yes. Yes.
Then between 2015 and 2019, another 5-year period, Dominic again we're in the mix, 0.4 on average, very exceptionally low levels of inflation. The highest in the country was Antigua, in the countries Antigua and Barbuda of 1.1. But look at what happens as we move to the more recent one, the inflation rate between 2020 and 2024. Okay, that period shows Dominica now blossoming to 3.1% a year for each of those 5 years, 3.1%. And that inflation rate is directly tied to the tax policy that this government has. Okay,
Wow.
that you see where they credit to the government, they were able to keep it down for some years, but in the past 5 years, it has been getting out of control. And every Dominican sees it when they go to the supermarket. Every Dominican feels it when they're told that a pound of goat meat is $20.
Wow.
Every Dominican feels it when they know a pound of fish that just a couple of years ago they were buying for $5 is now $10 a pound of fish. Okay, so inflation is getting out of hand, and that is because of the policy of the current government. So we are falling behind as far as that is concerned, and that is the reason why, again, as part of the policies that we are adopting, as part of the 10 pillar program that we're embarking upon, we are planning to tackle that issue of tax reform. We absolutely must introduce tax reform because the Dominican public need that relief. You know, 3.1% over a 5 year period means that you are growing. If you're to annualize that, that's 15% over 5 years. That is simply not good enough. And so it is a problem for us here in Dominica, and in particular, as we've seen, the problem has a reason where the government of Dominica has not been able to give salary increases to the public servants, and we are seeing that inflation continues to eat at the very dollar that the people are able to earn in this country, and so that is a serious cause of concern. And that's the reason why I wanted to highlight inflation there. So while, yeah, we did well in the past, but lately, over the past 5 years, it's getting out of control. And until you control your tax policy, until you begin to reduce those high taxes that are in place in Dominica, you're going to have a problem. But as we saw, so in the last budget,
Yes.
it got worse.
It got
Right?
worse.
You
Yes.
have a number of tax increases. You have a number of fees that are going back into effect that were once reduced. So it's going to make the inflation situation become extremely worse for people. And the 8% that has been offered by government over the next 3 years will in no way begin to address this imbalance that we have. And so that's a cause for concern. And another reason why the 10 pillars become so critical, because with those 10 pillars, we will be addressing this. Because bear in mind, we're adopting a holistic approach to the economy. We have every sector, every area that can impact the economy in some way. We are going to be tackling those to ensure that we restore growth to this country, ensure that we put people back to work, and ensure that we take our place. We bounce back up. I don't like the idea that we last, bro. Honestly.
Yeah.
I don't like that idea at all. That Dominica, given where we were before, that we last Kakarot, that's not good. That does not sit very well with me at all. And so
Yeah. So
we have to work to get that done. Absolutely.
before you go to the before you go to the next slide, though, let us stay on inflation a little bit just to get some clarity. And if it's not correct, what I'm about to say, then you know to fix it up. But some people would say that many are of the view that we import inflation. That's a fact. I mean, when we import a lot of things into Dominica, and if the price manufacturing is high, then we pay for all that. Plus, when it comes to Dominica, the various taxes that you see, and I'm happy that the 10 pillar plan is addressing tax reform. So all this will take care of it. But what about in terms of our export import? Because it seems to me that we avoid on that one, and there's a large gap between our export and the import. And if we at least inflation for sure in a real sense, just basically understanding it, I'm sure this can be reduced if we take a proactive into doing more exports.
So somebody will think that so someone listening to you will think that I shared my presentation with you. I did not.
No, we didn't say that.
I absolutely did not, because in any case, I just finished it a few minutes ago.
No, we didn't say that.
So yeah, I did not have a chance. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll come back to the per capita GDP. I wanted to finish with the GDP. But
Yes.
let me do this. Let me finish with the GDP. and
Yes.
then I will come to your question because it's absolute is the actually the next slide up.
Right.
Yeah. So again, I wanted to show the per capita. Now, what we've done is that we have simply taken. You say, well, okay. Um, somebody might say, well, St. Lucia has a much bigger economy compared to us because they have probably three. They have more than 3 times our population.
Population, yes.
So it makes sense if they are 3 4 times our population that the economy should be 3 4 times ours. Somebody can just argue that, right? Um, but then how do you explain St. Kitts and Nevis, which
It's
is
smaller. Yeah.
about 2/3 of our population? St. Kitts
That's
about
correct.
50,000. Okay, so to help us come out of that idea that a bigger economy will automatically have, or a bigger country population wise will automatically have a bigger economy, what you do is that you basically what we call we normalize is a big term, but what you in fact do, you take your nominal GDP and you divide it by your population. Okay, because so each country will have a certain size of population. You use that country's population and you divide their nominal GDP, their total output of goods and
Of goods
services,
and services, yes.
by the population, and then you can rank them. Okay, and then you can rank them, and that is what we have there. So that is these are the ranking figures that you have, and again, as you see, last day,
Hmm.
Dominica,
Porque quase
and
não,
last
não
again.
tudo é na coisa na lascata.
Yeah. So let me tell you what the per capita, in case you're not able to read the chat very well, but let me tell you what the chat is telling us. Dominica has the lowest per capita GDP in all of the countries. So it has nothing to do with the population, because if it was by population, since we have more people than St. Kitts and Nevis, we would have had a higher per capita. Okay, but guess what? Dominica's per capita is $25,163. In other words, if you distribute your total output of goods and services amongst your population, every man, woman, and child in Dominica will get 25,163.
Right.
If we do the same in St. Kitts and Nevis, it is $59,000.38. Okay, St. Kitts and Nevis is 59,000. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is close to Dominica, 30,008, but they have surpassed us. They are 30,896. St. Lucia is at 38,532. And Grenada is at 29,358, with Antigua and Barbuda at 52,600. So effectively, Antigua and Barbuda, in terms of per capita, is twice as prosperous as Dominica is. Okay,
Oh.
twice as prosperous. St. Kitts and Nevis is almost 3 times, all right, about 2.5 times as wealthy as Dominica is. And we are kind of close to St. Vincent and St. Lucia, yeah, but certainly Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis has outpaced us terribly. Yeah, so that is the story there on per capita GDP, and I suspect this time is moving very quickly tonight. So let's move ahead.
Yes.
And look at this chart now. That is the final chart I have, but it has all of the information that you asked there. And so we are going to be looking at this information very, very closely. Then you asked about exports and imports. Okay. And again, we have the data before us. You can see from it, there is the second line is the goods exports. Okay. So if you just have to read across. Antigua and Barbuda export, and that's in millions of EC dollars. 209 million for Antigua and Barbuda. Dominica, 42.3 million. Grenada, 327.8 million. St. Lucia, 148.8 million. The Grenadines, 160.2, and St. Kitts and Nevis, 81.3. So even St. Kitts and Nevis somehow managed to outpace Dominica with the export of goods. Now,
Oh,
explain that to me. As my friend would say, make that make sense to me. How it is that we cannot do better with our goods exports. Why is it? Why is only $42 million a year? A country that at one time used to do close to $200 million in goods when we had bananas and at different times. Close to 200 million. We are now at a lowly $42.3 million as and that those numbers are as of 2024. $42.3 million in exports of goods. But look at the statistic above, the current account balance. That's the only one that Dominica has a bigger number. But a bigger negative number means that you're still dead last. It's worse. It's not
it
better.
was you beat a rock bottom. You beat a rock bottom.
It's not. So all the countries have deficits. So what you do is that you basically take your exports of goods and services and you subtract it from your imports of goods and services. That's the current account balance. So the current account balance, that first line, gives us the total goods and services that are exported from
40.
the country, subtracted from what is imported.
40.
Right. So when we do that, we have a net outflow of $603 million, the highest in the Caribbean. But in terms of that statistics, it is again the worst. We are
It
dead
was.
last with our current account balance,
Oh,
$603.1 million, the worst off
wow.
in the country. Look at St. Lucia. St. Lucia only has 109.9 deficit. That means that country can easily get into a surplus,
That's
right?
correct.
Because they're only at $109.9 million. So again, it shows a level of development in that country. It shows the country is moving forward, making progress, unlike Dominica under the Dominica Labour Party. We are, in fact, going backwards, and every statistics we have seen tonight reflects that picture of a country that is going back on the regime that has been in office for the last 25 years. Now look at tourism receipts. Again, that shows the tremendous room that we have. Most of the countries are $2-3 billion every year from tourism. Okay, so Antigua has $2.8 billion in tourism receipts. Grenada, $2 billion for Grenada, $3.3 billion for St. Lucia, 791 billion for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and $1 billion for St. Kitts and Nevis. Dominica is at $363.7 million in tourism receipts. So again, bottom of the table, much room for expansion, much room to improve. We have a solid tourism product. We have not found a way to get enough tourists into Dominica so that we can create the kind of jobs and opportunities that are required for our people. We have not been able to do that. Then I'm going to skip over the credit in the private sector. I'm going to come back to that in a while because that is where I want to talk about the private sector.
That's
But
right.
let's go down one line and we look at the debt stock. Very interesting, huh? Look at our debt stock and then look at the debt to GDP ratio. So Antigua and Barbuda is almost 4 times the size of the Dominican economy. So we can expect them to have a much higher debt level. Okay, so St. Lucia, Antigua, sorry, has a $4 billion debt level. Dominica, $1.9 billion. Grenada, $2.7 billion. St. Lucia, $5 billion. St. Vincent, $2.7 billion. And St. Kitts and Nevis, $1.5 billion. But what is important there is not the amount that you spend because that you borrow, because
Oh,
you could be borrowing and then the money is used for investments and so on, which would
immediately
translate
pay back.
to a higher GDP, a
Yes.
higher output of goods and services. So what you do again, you normalize this by taking your total debt of stock and you divide it by your gross domestic product. Okay, you divide it by your gross domestic product so that you can now compare with the other countries. And guess what? The only country in the region above 100% of debt to GDP is Dominica.
Dominica. That's a bad situation. Is that a bad situation? Because I wanted to
It's
do
a horrible situation
right, right. I wanted to
because
tell
it
us
has
what
all
is
sorts of
ideal, what is
implications.
ideal.
All
Yes.
sorts of implications.
Good.
If you are borrowing more than you're
Yes.
able to output, you have a serious problem.
That's correct.
Because for one, the debt servicing cost that goes into this is horrendous. We spend over $100 million every year servicing these high debt levels, over $100 million. And when you think about it, if you're spending over $100 million and you consider that you for all your money from taxes total about $300 million, that gives you an idea as to why we're in trouble, especially when the CBI ends. Because that high debt service, because of this high debt to GDP ratio that we have. Okay, and then the closest one to us, the closest one to us is after Dominica. The closest one is in terms of debt to GDP is Grenada, and even then it is 73%. But look at St. Kitts and Nevis, and every time I talk about debt and St. Kitts and Nevis, I kind of raise my shoulder just a little bit.
I realize.
Because when I went to St. Kitts in 2012 and 2014, St. Kitts had a debt to GDP ratio of 163% of debt to GDP. 163. And my task as the debt advisor was to make recommendations on how they could reduce that debt. Okay, and in fact, I meant earlier, but I've heard all sorts of stories around that. I meant earlier to show a picture of the report, but just the cover of the report. I will do that next week, but I did not get a chance to do it to to establish that was what I did in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Yes, we need
And
the records for sure.
importantly, they followed that process, and now they have a very low debt to GDP ratio. It means that their debt service has gone way down. That is money that they can now use to go into development, money that they can now use to do different things, improve their health system, improve their education system, because a lot of those resources are no longer going into paying debt. Okay, so that's a good thing to be able to reduce your debt to GDP ratio. All right, then we come to credit to the private sector.
Yes.
All right, that's another statistic. When I saw it, I rocked back. I was like, wow, look at this. In 2024, the banking system extended $609 million to the private sector in Dominica. $609 million. On the other hand, St. Vincent and the Grenadines extended $1.1 billion to the private sector. That's almost double, right? Grenada, 1.9 billion, almost 2 billion. Grenada gave to their private sector from the banking system. And then St. Kitts and Nevis, 1.9 billion. But look at Antigua and St. Lucia. St. Lucia, $3.3 billion. Almost twice the amount that Dominica gave to the private sector. No, sorry, I'm looking at Grenada. Sorry, that is actually Dominica, and almost five. That's 5 times. That's more than 5 times the amount of money compared to Dominica that is going towards St. Lucia's private sector. And similarly in Antigua and Barbuda, $2.2 billion. So that tells me that the private sector in Dominica is way too small, and also they're having difficulty accessing monies from the banking sector to do what they need to do. And that is something that is addressed in our 10 pillars. Again, let me remind Dominicans who are listening that we have addressed this issue of the small private sector because what we want to do ideally is to have the private sector do much more in terms of employment. And the way you do that is that you put policies in place that will encourage private sector development. And a key part of that, of course, is to have a banking sector that you can work with, that will be able to extend credit, extend money to the private sector. So that is another critical statistic. Again, guess what? Dominica last. Every single statistic tonight, except for inflation in the year 2010 to 2014.
2020, yeah, 2010, 2014, yeah.
Dominica has been last. And look at this. So I've looked at it, say, okay, well, it's true, it's an economic discussion, but I looked at other statistics, okay? I said, let me kind of phase out and look at other statistics that matters, more or less social statistics. So guess what? The literacy rate in Dominica, we are not dead last. We are better than St. Lucia by 2%. Okay? But the rest, Antigua is at 99%. Grenada is at 99%. St. Lucia is at 90. The Grenadines at 97. And St. Kitts and Nevis at 98. So we have a lot of room to improve our literacy, our adult literacy. That means 8% of the Dominican population cannot read and write.
Yeah.
At a reasonable standard, and that is high, because you're talking about of a population of 70, you're talking about over close to 6,000 people who are not able to read and write in Dominica, and that is unacceptable. Again, the 10 pillars addresses that issue of education and ensuring that every single Dominican is able to get an education and to go through our systems. There's a lot of other statistics around that literacy rate, like the high school dropout rates, the number of females who enroll, and you would see in Dominica is almost 2 to 1 in terms of the enrollment rate of our females compared to our males. That's another discussion we'll have on Real Talk later on when we talk about social issues in Dominica. We'll be looking at some of those statistics, but for tonight, it's just enough to show you what exists with regards to the rest of Dominica compared to the rest of the islands. And then we have the issue of life expectancy. Again, we share the last place with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Notwithstanding, Dominica is a nature island of the world, notwithstanding that we tout our food and our natural environment and our centenarians and so on. Not the hard fact is our life expectancy is only 71 years compared to the highest in the region in our region, Antigua and Barbuda, is 79. Does that surprise you, so?
Well, the point is, you made the point. Nature Island, we're supposed to be talking about organic food, and we're talking about we have an increase in terms of the non-communicable diseases. We know that. So that is one area I believe that we should improve on. But the figures are stunning. I mean, the data that you have presented are actually just bringing to light the inefficiencies that we experience. And it seems to me the same way the government have on the roadside saying road edge failure of all roads. It seems to me there is failure with respect to the governance of this country. And just as you say that, I know that we are almost out of time. Some people are proposing that we should extend the program, but no, we are going to evaluate it, look at it, monitor the vibes and get feedback. For now, 1 hour seems suffice, but we'll be looking in the future to see what is happening. But yes, but Doc, to be honest, I mean, I'm not surprised at all at some of the figures, because remember we had a minister of government who told us that he is tired of Dominica being last, which means that the minister himself was privy to the information, or some of the information at least, and he recognizes that Dominica has been last in everything. And himself says he's fed up, although he was part of the government, but he was fed up that Dominica is last in everything. So, Doc, a lot of people are saying here from the end stream there, that is, this is a lot of information, good information. This is the kind of education that we need. This is the kind of economic indicators that we need to be presented with. so that we can at least craft a path for to create a plan to get us out from this economic morass that we have been in. And we have known over the time that this government has actually been involved in more failure than performance. But we stand in, you're talking about house building, and you're talking about, the China Friendship Hospital, and one of the biggest capital projects that is right now taking place on the island, which is the International Airport. See the state of the country's economy. See how it is revealed to us nakedly that we are not in a good position. So, Doc, really, I mean, we're out of time, but I know that we have been talking about shared prosperity with respect to the 10 pillars, and I believe that seemed to the 10 pillars seem to be the way to go with respect to bringing some economic sanity to our land and to bring some real economic relief to our people with respect to making them achieve and attain a better standard of living. And so, Doc, we really want to thank you for the work that you do, and we trust you because we know that you're an economist by profession. You've actually helped other countries restructure their economic situation and, of course, get results. And most of the things that you have been involved in, the countries get results. Notwithstanding what some people try to say, the records are there. It is not your fault that if some things are not sustained by the time that you intervened. I believe that it created some landmark, and so we want to thank you for the work that you do. So as we wind down, what else do you want to relish? I know there's a lot.
Yes, I wanted to share a little thing else on the that last slide. We also saw the population, right? And
Yes,
that's another reason, and it plays very much into the narrative that we saw tonight.
that's right.
Small economy, small private sector, high deficit, importing more because we're simply not producing enough. We don't have enough private sector concerns doing the manufacturing, doing what is necessary
That's right.
to bring that imbalance down. And a lot of it has to do with that, with the size of population. Although someone might argue that St. Kitts and Nevis has a much smaller population, and yet they're doing so much better than Dominica. So everything is not on the back of the population or the size. Is how you structure, is how you organize it. But the fact that Dominica's population in the 1980s was over 80,000. One time I think we got to 83,000, and we're now at 73,000. Tells a story. It tells me that Dominicans are deserting their island in droves. They're continuing to migrate. That the rate of the what we call the natural rate of increase in the population, which is your births minus your deaths, is not enough to sustain or to compensate for the heavy level of migration, outward migration that we have. And so that is something that I believe the government needs to address its minds to. And a lot of what is going on again is the young people. A lot of that migration
Yes.
is the young people. So the size of the population, we have 30,000 less than Antigua and Barbuda. If you look at Saint Lucia, Saint Lucia is way up there. If I can pull this up, Saint Lucia is popular 179, almost 180,000. You know, Grenada 126,000. So all the other countries they have made the 100 mark, except Dominica, of course, and St. Kitts and Nevis is just because of size. I mean, St. Kitts and Nevis is a small, very small country, and they're already densely populated. So I don't expect St. Kitts and Nevis to get much beyond that. But for Dominica, we have room because we had 80,000 in the 90s,
In the 80s,
in the
90s, yes. Yeah,
90s, we had 83,000, and we had room. We had still had space then, so we have more rooms. And all of the houses are empty in La Plaine and in Castibros and some beautiful houses that were built during the time of the banana boom are just shut down.
that's
So
right.
we can accommodate many, many, many people. And so I just wanted to draw again our listeners' attention to the population size and the migration, the heavy impact of migration on our country's prospects. But I think the biggest lesson for me from this, what we did tonight, the biggest lesson for me is the need to really do something about the size of the private sector in Dominica. because a government, especially a government as incompetent as this government, will never be able to solve the issue of unemployment. They will never be able to grow the economy to 5, 6% because they lack the competence, they lack even the will to do it is not there. Because politics and governance is about building wealth for themselves. It is about hoarding and staying in office as long as possible. So it has nothing really to do with the development of the country, which is what the focus really ought to be. But that's not what the focus of this government is. And it comes out very, very glaringly because you see in every respect we are worse off than the rest of the countries in the region. We continue to lose our young people to all of those countries because the economies are doing so much better than ours. And we need to do something about the private sector, and having a deliberate policy, especially on incomes and tax policies, where we have to go. And the 10 pillars again addresses this issue because we understand that the importance of that we need to drive the private sector to create those jobs for our people and give people options so that they don't need to work with government. And that's the thing, and sometimes I wonder, I mean, I think about it. I hope that's not the case. I hope the government of Dominica is not deliberately preventing the growth of the private sector so that they can employ everybody and they become the biggest employer and people have that allegiance. I hope that's not what's happening there. Because you wonder why it is that so little attention is being paid to the private sector. You wonder why it is that not enough is done to generate that kind of growth and activity within the private sector. So these are some of the lessons that I think we've learned from tonight's podcast and program. And I hope the Dominican public again will give the United Workers' Party that opportunity to be the government of this country, because we do have a plan that can transform this country, a plan that can create jobs, a plan that can create wealth for our people, that can put our people on a path to shared prosperity. And so I hope that the people of Dominica continue to listen and give us that opportunity the next time elections are called in Dominica.
Yes, thank you. Well, you've heard it from the political leader of the United Workers' Party, Team Dominica, and an economist by profession, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. As you know, with the 10 pillar plan, this is what is the landmark right now for recovery of the state of the economy. We're in a bad state, and we would like that, we see a change in government so that, we can implement this plan. And I know Dr. Thomson Fontaine, have the people in heart. You could hear him, you could hear his voice, he doesn't cry, or I haven't seen him cry yet, but you can see how pitiful, he feels about the whole thing. And you can feel that he's someone who is caring, and he does that kind of, work with a caring heart. And so I hope that you can find in him the ability to rescue us from this situation. And we would like your support. We are requesting for your support. And the next time the electoral bell is rung in this country, then for us to achieve meaningful development, economic development, to bring a better quality of life for people, then this government should not exist. And so you know what to do. Let me just thank Dr. Fontaine again and the many persons who have participated and asked questions. And Doc, even as we speak, some people are still questioning whether or not we still have 60,000 persons. We have not had a census carried out for some time. So I believe that maybe there should be a possible adjustment either up or down of population. That we'll have to wait and see when that is done. And I just want to say till next time, we want to thank you, but remember to support us for what we do. And we do have a raffle going on with respect to our fourth vehicle, a Noah. So for those of you who live in the diaspora, you can purchase a whole book, 250 EC dollars, could get your book. You could send the money through one of your family members and have them fill up the book and increase your chances of winning. So that when you visit, you could be the lucky winner. You could have a chance to win this vehicle and to go about. So if you feel you want to patronize, and this in itself is revenue, so we expect you to patronize, buy a book, a whole book, like some people have done. Nepta, I know you say good night, and to many of you say good night and who are listening. It seems to me from all accounts, what the reviews that I'm getting there, Doc, from the end of the stream and the end of what you will have been writing, it seems to be a very informative, seems to have been an informative program, and people are buying into it. They say they like that kind of approach, and that is the kind of approach we should have with respect to looking at some of the information available and to develop a plan, just like you have the 10 pillars to bring Dominica to economic resuscitation. So let me thank you once more. Until next time, we say good night. Have a good night, everyone.
God bless.
God bless.